Hi boys and girls, it's Mrs. Craig coming to you for another quick reading lesson. Today we're going to be reading The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton. It is a Caldecott Medal winner. It's a beautiful book with a really good story. But before we get started, please grab a piece of paper and pencil. Draw me 5 boxes. In the first box, we're going to put character and setting. In the next box, we'll put conflict and resolution. And the bottom, we'll do beginning, middle, end. Please pause the video if you need to go grab paper, pencil, or you want to draw your boxes. Remember, I'm not looking for perfect boxes. I'm just looking that you're trying your best. And as you're getting started, please write The Little House as the title at the top. All right, boys and girls, we'll start the story. The Little House by Virginia Lee Burton. Once upon a time, there was a little house way out in the country. She was a pretty little house. She was strong and well built. The man that built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she shall live to see our great-great-grandchildren's great-great-grandchildren living in her." The little house was very happy as she sat on the hill. She watched the countryside around her. She watched the sun rise in the morning, and she watched the sun set in the evening. Day followed day, each one a little different from the one before, but the little house stayed just the same. In the night, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, then back again to a thin old moon. When there was no moon, she watched the stars. Way off in the distance, she could see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about the city and wondered what it would be like to live there. Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the seasons. In the spring, when the days grew longer and the sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south. She watched the grass turn green, she watched the buds on the trees swell, and the apple trees burst into blossom. She watched the children playing in the brook. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves and the white daisies cover the hill. She watched the gardens grow. She watched the apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children swimming in the pool. In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights colder, she watched the first frost turn the leaves to bright yellow and orange and red. She watched the harvest gathered and the apples picked. She watched the children go back to school. In the winter, the nights were long and the days were short, the countryside covered with snow. She watched the children coasting and skating. Year followed year. The apple trees grew old and new ones were planted. The children grew up and went away to the city. And now at night, the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. One day, the little house was surprised to see a horseless carriage coming down the road, the winding country road. Pretty soon there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. Pretty soon along came surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the house, the little house. Pretty soon along came a steam shovel and dug up a road through the hill that covered with daisies. Then some trucks came and dumped big stones on the road. Then some trucks came with little stones. Then some trucks came with tar and sand. And finally a steamroller came and rolled it all smooth, and the road was done. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles going back and forth to the city. Gasoline stations, roadside stands, and small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster now than before. More roads were made. The countryside was divided into lots, more houses and bigger houses, apartment houses and tenant houses. Schools, stores, and garages spread all over the land and crowded around the little house. No one wanted to live in her and take care of her anymore. She couldn't be sold for gold or silver, so she just stayed there and watched. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the street lights shone all night. It must be living in the city. This must be living in the city, thought the little house, and didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the fields of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. Pretty soon there were trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed to be very busy, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Pretty soon there was an elevated train going back and forth above the little house. The air was filled with dust and smoke. The noise was so loud that it shook the little house. Now she couldn't tell when spring came, or summer, or fall, or winter. It all seemed about the same. Little house is kind of buried down there. Pretty soon there was a subway going back and forth underneath the little house. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it and hear it. People were moving faster and faster. No one noticed the little house anymore. They hurried by without a glance. Pretty soon they tore down the apartment houses and the tenant houses around the little house and started digging big cellars, one on each side. Steam shovels dug down 3 stories on one side and 4 stories on the other. Pretty soon they started building up. They built up 25 stories on one side and 35 stories on the other. See, little house kind of buried. Now the little house only saw the sun at noon and didn't see the moon or stars at night at all because the lights of the city were too bright. She didn't like living in the city. At night she used to dream of the country and the fields of daisies and apple trees dancing in the moonlight. The little house was very sad and lonely. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken. Her shutters hung crookedly. She looked shabby, though she was just as good a house as ever underneath. Then one fine spring morning, along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house so well. She saw the shabby little house, but she didn't hurry by. There was something about the little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "This little house looks just like the little house my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl. Only that little house was way out in the country, on a hill covered with daisies and apple trees growing around." They found out it was the very same house, so she went to the movers to see if the little house could be moved. Movers looked the little house all over and said, "Sure, this house is as good as ever. She's built well, and we could move her anywhere." So they jacked up little house, put her on wheels. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. They got a moving truck and they moved the house. At first, Little House was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. They rolled along the big road. They rolled along the little roads until they were way out in the country. When Little House saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel so sad anymore. They went along and along, but they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried Little House here, and they tried her there. Finally, they saw a little hill in the middle of the field, and apple trees growing around. "There," said the great-great-granddaughter, "that's just the place." "Yes, it is," said Little House to herself. The cellar was dug on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from the road to the hill. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again they painted her a lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down on her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again she could watch the sun and moon and stars. Once again she could watch spring and summer and fall and winter come and go. Once again she was lived in and taken care of. Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she want to live there. The stars twinkled above her. A new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country. So boys and girls, please take your 5 boxes, and I'll help you fill out some. The characters, not a typical person or animal, but who in the story has the feelings and goes through the changes and has the problem? The title is a big clue. It's the little house. The little house is our main character. So characters, please put the little house. The setting, there are 2 because it changes. Starts out in the countryside, so put countryside. And then it changes. Where does it change to? It changes to the city as the city grows and they build new houses and streets and roads and subways. So it changes to the city, and by the end, it changes back to the countryside. Conflict. What's Little House's problem? What goes wrong? What does Little House need to change? And then, what is the resolution? I'm going to let you figure that part out. Write it here in the conflict and resolution. Beginning, middle, end. Think of the pictures you saw in the book. Think of the parts I read. What happened at the beginning? Where was Little House? Think of how that changed to the middle, where the biggest problem was and where you saw the most change. That's the middle. And the end. How is everything peaceful and calm at the end? How is it fixed? Please draw those 3 or write those 3. Get someone you love or care about to take a picture of your work and send it to me on Seesaw, Dojo. Email it to me. I can't wait to see your hard work. I hope you enjoyed the story, The Little House. It's one of my favorites. It's a good story. It's a good story. Boys and girls, I miss you very much. I'm so proud of all your hard work, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.